More sophisticated tactics, we've now seen the rise of development of using Tor or CAPTCHAs for their command and control. And then largely, as I mentioned, they're victim agnostic. So this is not a US problem, or even a Mexico problem, or a Europe problem. This is now becoming a global problem very, very quickly. And it started as a nuisance, and it's going to be a strategic challenge, just like we've seen in the United States in our healthcare sector. And finally, that multiple platforms are being targeted. They want to expand their market so that they can hit as many victims as possible. OS X, Android, XP, Windows 7. Hopefully there's no more XP left. They are looking for every new platform that they can get their malware on, and their creativity is only limited by how much money they can make. And they're making a lot of money. Globally, just for some quick figures, the FBI estimated that last year in the United States, ransomware cost victims $15 million. It's a lot of money. By April of this year, they estimate that ransomware cost $240 million. If you are a criminal and you are looking for a quick fix, this is it, my friend. This is the way to go. And unfortunately, the tools are even more available and more prolific, and they're being more and more effective. So all right, enough doom and gloom. Scaring you, that does no good, right? I can't just scare you without any way to actually do something about it. So what do you do about it? First of all, you start a prevention focus. You have to see to prevent ransomware. You can't just pay the ransom. You can't pay the ransom and hope that your data will come back. You have to think about preventing it ahead of time. And it starts with high-quality intelligence, like I talked about. So at Palo Alto Networks, we are deployed in a global manner, linked back up to a central threat intelligence research cloud. So from this central threat research cloud, we were able to spot new unknown malware and able to push out protections across our global customer base. It's a great protection model, works very well. But the most important and interesting thing about this is that our research team, Unit 42, is able to look across this base, anonymized, and they are able to build out campaign activity. So they're not just saying, here's the new ransomware, here's the new threat. They are saying, here's the people behind this. They were the same ones behind that, who were the same ones behind that. And as you know, criminals, they're economically motivated, which means they're lazy, right? They're lazy, so they reuse their infrastructure. So if we spot somebody who's been doing something in the past, we can see their playbook, and we can see their attack lifecycle, and we can then determine where they're going to go next, right? And it's this research and this in-depth research that we're available to see because of our focus on our global footprint. It takes us away from a model where traditionally we would have to rely on individual feeds or relationships or specific indicators being released by the police, and then putting those into your system and doing hours worth of research, has made it down to minutes, doing this automatically and having all of this research at your fingertips. But the intelligence is no good if you can't do anything with it. Unit 42 is interesting. They put out great reports. They're very impactful, they're very relevant and timely, very interesting. But if it's not useful, it's just interesting. So your intelligence has to be actionable, which is why we focus on intelligence that is not just specific indicators, but actually full campaign information with context behind it, with the information that says this is targeting your sector, this is targeting you individually, or this is a global threat. Specifically, here are the indicators. Here's the command and control channels. Here are all the IOCs. Here are the hashtags for all of the different threats that are out there. Putting all of those back into your protection system and having it automatically ingest those protections is critical for actually making intelligence useful. The second part, architecture. How you are deployed, architecture matters, right? Thinking about, am I just adding complexity? Am I adding to my own problem, or am I making myself more efficient? And so to think about your architecture, I want to talk a little bit about technically how ransomware works. So ransomware has three primary vectors. It uses exploit kits, which take advantage of a vulnerability. It uses malicious email attachments to send in malware, or it uses malicious links in emails. Sometimes even having the email pre-populate without clicking on it, but just as a preview, is enough to send you to a malicious web page and cause a drive-by download of malware on your system. Well, step one for a compromised website attack looks a little bit like this. The user visits the compromised website, which is often in a trusted location. They can either do this through a man-in-the-middle attack by putting a fake web page, or they can direct you to one of their sites that looks legitimate, but's under their control. Step two, the malicious code exploits and then takes you to another page that actually contains the real threat. And we've even seen advertisements do this as well, where the initial advertisement is clean and clear, nothing wrong with it, but it links you back to an unknown or unspotted URL that is actually hosting that malicious payload. Step 3, the exploit kit on your endpoints will take advantage of a flaw that the attacker has learned ahead of time is there. If you look at the attack lifecycle, step 1 is gathering intelligence. The attackers know what works before they launch it. Not only do they know what it works on your environment, but they run their stuff against existing antivirus to know that antivirus won't stop it, and it gets past signatures. Step 4, the exploit takes advantage and starts running. Then step 5, it actually delivers the payload. And this is the control mechanism. This is where the adversary has the full ability to unleash their actual encryption. And step 6, what modern ransomware does is it doesn't just throw up a lock screen and say, oh, you can't get to your computer. It goes very specifically hunting for files that are often associated with important business or personal relationships. And it will hunt for these files and start encrypting them, AES-256. Very strong encryption, so that even if we can get at the files, even if we can remove the ransomware, the files are still dead, and you are still out of luck. Works similarly for a Word document. And I bring up this sample specifically because even though we've all learned, and many of you in the security industry have learned, never turn on macros in Microsoft Word, we just saw recently with the Locky ransomware, sent out to 100 million Amazon.com users, had a Word document. And when you click on that Word document, the user opens it thinking it's a legitimate file. The next step is it says, hey, thanks for opening this file. Turn on those macros and we'll be able to show you this really cool document. It needs macros because it's super cool, right? That is exactly when the payload loads up a URL, redirecting your computer, and then downloading the ransomware, encrypting your files, and you're once again done. And this was seen out in the wild and reported on just last week. You would think we've all learned about macros. They've kind of gone away, but they're back. They're back in force. And as I mentioned earlier, the attackers are doing these processes not just for spear phishing or not just for drive-by downloads, but they are doing them at every point that they can get into your network. So if you look at your networks, what are the 3 main areas? Over the network, right? So this is our common paths like web browsing or email. SaaS-based applications, what I talked about earlier. So what we've seen specifically in our Unit 42 is just found threats that look at organizations that are all using Google Drive or Box or OneNote, other large cooperative platforms. They'll find folders that have many, many users all pulling files down, and they'll drop the malware into those boxes. And then everybody who is a member of that box needs that file, goes to it, and they are infected at scale. So SaaS presents a very big opportunity to strike once and be effective across the board. But like I said, you can't use it. You can't not use SaaS, right? I mean, SaaS is becoming more and more important to our collaboration, our ability to work at scale, and cost efficiency. So we can't just walk away because it's a threat. And finally, directly to the endpoint. This is a big threat because, as I mentioned, before attackers launch attacks, they run the test through every major antivirus software they can get their hands on. This tells them that their signatures are clean. They can walk through completely, and they can take advantage of that exploit on the endpoint. Which is why we have to stop thinking about just hunting for known signatures and start looking for unknowns and stop looking to stop common exploit techniques on the endpoint. So our coordinated strategy is 3 things. First, reduce the attack surface. Then, prevent everything that you can that you know about. And finally, prevent everything that you don't know about and turn those into knowns so that you can stop them and then share those best practices with everybody. But not only do you have to do each 3 of these steps, it's not enough. But you have to do them faster than the attackers, which becomes the tricky part. Right? Because if you're just relying on one product seeing something here, one product seeing something there, one product seeing something there, it is on you personally to manually go through, deploy that prevention, and then share that back out, and then take in new information and go back to the start and start all over again. And by the time that you've started all over again, the attacker has gone through twice times around. So we have to build out systems that do this automatically and that are integrated together to talk to one another and take advantage of each one of these different parts of the strategy automatically. So what does a hard target look like? when you're looking to reduce your attack surface, there are 4 main goals. First, you have to gain visibility and block unknown traffic for everything. It is no more that I will ignore this traffic because it is likely not malicious. I think I know what it is. There's no more thinking or guessing, right? You have to know everything, and you have to be assured that you are knowing your network at least as well as the adversary. There was a talk at RSA by a security entity in the government, and they said, as attackers, we succeed because we know your network better than you. This has to change. You have to know your network better than the attackers. Second, you have to enforce application and user-based controls. So it's not enough just to whitelist these applications and say, okay, no one's going to use Twitter, right? What happens to your marketing team needs to use Twitter? But what happens when your financial team is dealing with PII? Do they get to use it as well? These types of risk-based policy decisions require you to know what applications are being used, who is using them, and how they are using them. This is a strategic level conversation that the CISO needs to be thinking about and implementing into their environment. It's no longer just block port 443 because we don't need it, or shut this down because it's a high threat, right? Applications and certainly malware are smart enough to get around existing static-based port controls. Third, stopping dangerous file types. One of the instances we had with a customer that was an industrial control systems customer. I won't use their industry, so we don't like talking about our customers. But in this one environment, on an endpoint for a human-machine interface, so basically the software portal that you use to access the machines that spin or lift things, we found Microsoft screensaver files. Why would you ever need Microsoft screensaver files on a human-machine interface? Turns out, surprise, they were bad, right? And this was a series of an attack, and this was a backdoor that had been planted directly at the keys to the machine, which is incredibly scary for who these guys were. The fourth is implementing an endpoint policy aligned to your risk. If you know that you have certain users that are a higher target than others, you have to watch their endpoint like a hawk, right? I brought my presentation in on a thumb drive today, right? You walk on in with anything. Come in, exploit the endpoint, and your entire system is compromised. It just takes that one foothold for an attacker to gain credentials and move laterally through the environment, which is the key strategy that we see in advanced attackers. Advanced attackers are not interested in the quick hit. The 28% that aren't financially motivated, the 28% that really want to own you because you're special and you have some incredible data, they are quiet and slow, and they take their time before they strike. And it's here at the endpoint that we are finally able to stop them by locking down exploits and keeping them off of your network. Second piece is preventing known threats. And I'll speed up a little bit. I think I'm running out of time. I apologize. I come from politics, so I talk a little bit too much. So stopping known exploits and malware during command and control traffic is very important. So as traffic is coming in and out to communicate back with the attacker, if you don't know what it is, it shouldn't be running. 2, you have to block access to malicious URLs. This is a big one. Not just policy to say you can't go to this gambling website or you can't play games on company time, but really what websites are actually hosting malware. 3rd, you have to scan for malware on SaaS-based applications. This is a new area. We didn't have to used to worry about this, but now we see attackers are already taking advantage of it. And 4th, you have to block known malware and exploits on the endpoint. So you have to do it at the perimeter, inside your network, and on the endpoint in a way that you can learn from every piece. So if an attacker gets in a little bit, they are pushed out from your environment and your global community's environment as well. And finally, we have to stop unknown threats. We have to identify them. We have to turn unknowns into knowns and repeat as quickly as possible. This is detecting unknown URLs, updating your prevention across organizations, adding context to your threats. So it's not just, hey, this is bad, but hey, this is bad because it's targeting the sector my business works in, and I've seen some of my other companies get hit by this. And then you have to block the unknown malware's exploits on the endpoint, once again. The easiest way to do this is with one look and one platform that looks across, that's in the right position, so that it's in line for the attack. You have to be in line for the attack in order for you to actually stop or see anything. Across your virtual and physical spaces, so as we've seen a lot of companies now doing hybrid cloud architectures or moving fully into the cloud. Silicon Valley, we have many companies that stood up as natively in the cloud. They grew up in the cloud, right? And this is where the threats exist as well. Amazon Web Services loves to say the security of the cloud is our problem. The security in the cloud is your problem. And that's something that a lot of times a lot of users don't really understand. They think I throw it in the cloud, it's all secure, it's all good. But you have to think about your architecture living in the cloud. Third is best-of-breed technologies. You can't just grab everything together, legacy technologies, wrap them in one package and sell them and say it's an all-in-one solution. It doesn't work anymore. You have to have next-generation technologies. Fourth, multiple points of detection. So you can't just try and detect them at your boundary or perimeter. You need to be trying to detect them everywhere you can along that attack lifecycle. Five is global analysis and threat knowledge. Being a part of an information-sharing community among your company peers or among other international vendors. They can tap you into threats that are seeing growing in other areas that turn into a storm that are eventually going to hit your shores. Control everything. It's not just enough to control it, but then be able to reprogram and readjust in seconds, because this is how fast adversaries are adjusting to your defenses. And prevention is possible with the right architecture. It's a platform that has lots of depth and is integrated and provides that control and visibility to you. And finally, information sharing, my favorite topic. Palo Alto Networks did something at the direction of our CEO a little unique and a little aggressive. He had this idea that intelligence information should not be what security companies compete on anymore. In fact, everybody is seeing a lot of threats, right? Everybody is seeing a lot of data. But that data is only useful to the security community if it can be shared. So we partnered with 3 of our other, what we considered competitors, to work together and called the Cyber Threat Alliance. And the alliance shares information about new threats daily. The requirement is 1,000 pieces of malware, unique, every day, which seems like a lot, but in reality is pretty small for what we actually see internally. The real value of the Cyber Threat Alliance comes for the joint research. So our Unit 42 team can work with the other research teams and correlate on threats. And then it's our responsibility as security vendors to go back and deploy those threats in our environment, to use them and protect our customers from that joint research. And this is something that we have all committed to. We've all committed to taking action on the intelligence information that's shared. And I would say if you meet any other vendors, and you're talking to them, ask them, are they a member of the Cyber Threat Alliance? If not, why not? Are they a member of some other information sharing group? How do they share that information? Are you being protected by the global community and not just an individual feed or individual vendor look? And as a final example of success, just last year, we targeted the most recent version of CryptoWall. As a community, one vendor looked at the command and control channels and was able to identify $325 million that had been stolen in Bitcoin by this one threat. And working with the other communities and the other vendors, we're able to identify their entire infrastructure and their entire toolkit. And with a quick coordinated strike, we were able to snap our fingers and shut them off across all of our customers at once. Now, this sounds like success. And in a way, it is a successful first step. But what we saw happen in the next 24 hours was economics at work. CryptoWall version 4 came out 24 hours after we had taken action. Some people look at this and they say, what good is it? They will always be faster. We look at this and say this was the first time ever security vendors who are aggressive with each other in the sale, go back there and talk to some of them. They're very aggressive, right? Have to be, selling their best products, came together for the purpose of taking down a common threat. And we did it successfully. Not only that, but we, from another point of view, forced the attackers to spend more time and hurry up and rush to try and keep their money, to try and deploy a new technology that was out there and aggressive. So the goal, and what we are working on now, is formalizing these information sharing partnerships and gaining more partners so that we can start doing these takedowns on other campaigns quickly and quickly and quickly. Because this is how we change the economics of the attack globally. If a new customer, if a new criminal sees that their infrastructure is constantly being pushed off by the entire security community, that changes their math. That changes their profit motive. And maybe they'll all go get legitimate jobs and become security researchers and come over to our side. Another thing we are doing is that we have made our unique visibility among our customers available back out to be correlated with other information. MindMeld is a free open source information sharing tool that correlates multiple feeds into one point. This is available for free online, and if you're a CISO and you're dealing with lots and lots of different feeds, and maybe you have Palo Alto Networks, even if you don't have Palo Alto Networks, you can download this tool, and we released it for the ability to manage and correlate that intelligence as a part of our effort to try and expand information sharing globally. And finally, one of the last duties that I had in Homeland Security was going in and helping host meetings for victims that we had noticed had been hit. And these meetings were always a little difficult because they went something like this. We would see something really bad, we would go to that power plant, that bank, that water facility, and we would sit down with two people. We would sit down with their head of security, obviously, and we would sit down with their CEO. Because since the information was often sensitive, we couldn't tell very many people. Unfortunately, it's embarrassing, but I don't like to say how often the CEO did not know who was in charge of their security. And they say, oh, are you from Homeland Security? And they say, sir, I work for you. I manage your security, you know? And we oftentimes had to be the people that make that awkward introduction. And my boss always said that you never want to be exchanging business cards during a crisis. So what we did is we developed some executive level questions. These executive level questions we would send to the CEO quietly ahead of time. So my boss, high-ranking guy, he would have the personal email and say, we're coming in to brief you. Here are some questions. And these questions would do two important things. The first thing is that they would help drive the conversation when we got there, when we deployed on site. But the second thing, and the most important thing that I feel, they made the boss look smart in front of his team, right? So it empowered that boss to say, hey, even though it's cybersecurity, it's a scary topic, you still have a responsibility to manage these risks and be knowledgeable about how those risks affect your company. You don't have to know denial of service from, a zero-day exploit or whatever, but you do have to know what in your company is at risk, and you have to understand how to ask good questions that drive results. So what we've done is we have the top 4 questions for ransomware. And I know a lot of you are that security specialist in your organization. So I'd say is take these notes, take them back to your boss. For your next meeting, get them to your boss. Get them to your boss's advisors so we can think about these questions and ask you these questions, and you have the answers ready. Do we protect our endpoints? What's our backup data recovery? What's our plan to handle ransomware if detected? The plan is very important because as much as I like to say prevention, there are cases where you may have to pay. And if you have to pay, then you want to think about the legal ramifications before you do. And you want to think about your connections to law enforcement that can help you catch these guys, or at least stop others from suffering the same fate as you. And finally, the most important thing is training of personnel. Training of personnel, making their awareness, raising the standard of cybersecurity hygiene in your organization, and then protecting those employees with your plan for prevention. With that, I want to thank you all very much for coming and listening to the presentation. You can go online and download our report on ransomware. It's a lot better than my speech, and it's a fascinating read. So I would encourage you to go online, check it out, and download our executive questions. Thank you very much. So I hear that I have a few more minutes for some questions and answers. If anybody has a question, I'm happy to answer it. I'm not in the government anymore, so I can speak a little bit more freely. Any questions? No. Great. Oh, yes.
Hi. The cyber attacks had 2 goals, money and the power, right? If you were a bad guy, an attacker, could you give us, how do you think on a possible cyber war?
Cyber war?
Yes.
Yes. So this is an interesting topic. We spent much time thinking about the next big cyber 9/11 in the government, thinking about threats taking down the whole power grid or destroying our financial sector. And even though that was a threat, it has not developed. And I have a theory why it has not developed. It's because the economics of cybersecurity drive smaller steps. We need this infrastructure to be working for the criminals to have success on it, as do the adversaries. So I think that while cyber war is still certainly possible, and I'm saying it's a major threat, as a community, we should be more concerned today about the slow drip of trust that every piece of ransomware on a personal computer has, or that every time you open up an app and it's got a bug in it. We need to be thinking about the customer and user experience of the internet, because this user experience is what is driving innovation and the 4th industrial revolution. And if customers decide that they can't trust us, if they decide that when they pull out their iPhone, they're not really sure if the numbers it says on their bank account is how much money they have, they will stop using them quickly, right? And they will abandon that. And this 4th industrial revolution that is driving so much innovation and progress will slow to a halt and ultimately force us back into darker times. Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. Excellent. Anybody more? Great. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I'll be around at the Palo Alto Networks booth a little bit longer if anybody has any personal questions. And thank you very much for hosting me, sir.